All right. Well, happy Monday to all of our Harris County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council fans. I hope that you all are having an amazing day. I'm Fisha Jenkins, and I'm the training director. And I have with me today Donna Amstberg, who is with the University of Houston. Just to kind of do a recap as we are waiting for other people to join us, just a reminder that this is our weekly pop-up training session that we are providing to provide you information that you can use to our community partners in healthcare, education, the faith-based community, government, also for those who are survivors of domestic violence. So this is information that we are providing for you to stay connected in the midst of this pandemic and beyond. A little bit about the Harris County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council for those who may not be familiar. We started in 1996. 1996, we are a nonprofit, and our goal is threefold. Threefold is our goal. Number one is to increase victim safety and access to services. Increase victim safety and access to services. Number two is to hold offenders accountable. Hold offenders accountable for their actions. And number three is to prevent further acts of violence and also to prevent deaths. So that is why we exist. And our community and partners are individuals just like you. We partner with law enforcement. We partner with those in the educational system, K through 12, and also post-secondary. We also collaborate with our healthcare partners. Why? Because what we know is that only about 33% of survivors of domestic violence will ever reach out for assistance. Only 33%. So that means 33% of survivors are actually reaching out to shelters. 33% are reaching out to law enforcement. And so what is happening to the remaining 67% of individuals who are not reaching out? Well, they are the individuals who are showing up in the emergency room. They are the individuals who maybe you are noticing something about their children. And that's why we coordinate with our community partners. I see Tina Lewis is there. Thank you so much, Tina, for joining us. Do me a favor and share out this video. So glad to have you with us today. So without further ado, our theme this month in August is children, youth, and domestic violence. Children, youth, and domestic violence. You can go back to the first session that we did, and I gave some statistics about children and domestic violence. Here's what I want you to know is approximately 10 million children witness domestic violence every year. Last week, we had Amy Johnson, who is with the Harris County Sheriff's Office and also the Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, to share with us strategies about moving through the judicial system. And one of the things that Amy talked about was about the trauma that children re-experience when they're going through the criminal justice system. And so I was very excited she mentioned that because this week we're going to talk about children and trauma specifically. Hey there, Onika, all the way from Tobago. Good to see you. Please share this out. This is going to be some really great information today. So really want to get that information about children and trauma. And just before I introduce my guest, last week, there was a news story, and you can go back to our timeline and see it. It was about a little first grader. And I want you to imagine this as Donna begins to share with us today. A first grader last week, first day of school. In fact, I think it happened last Monday. She's preparing for school. She gets out her laptop and she joins her Zoom virtual classroom. And she's probably excited. However, as soon as class starts, her mother is gunned down in the house. And all the children in that virtual classroom witnessed that. Now, here's the question as we are in the midst of this pandemic, and we know that many children may not return to the classroom for safety. However, the other side of that is how many of our children are actually safe at home when we realize that here in Texas, 1 in 3 women are in abusive relationships and 1 in 7 men. What are these children witnessing every single day as they get ready to log into class? This whole classroom witnessed a mother lose her life. And we now have to think about the trauma that those other children witness and the trauma of this child, 6 years old. And so to help us to better understand this, I've invited our guest today, Donna Amstberg. And so let me briefly give her bio, and then we're going to launch in. Donna Amstberg is a licensed clinical social worker, currently a clinical assistant professor with the Graduate School of Social Work at the University of Houston, as well as the director of the Trauma Education Program. She has been working with survivors of domestic violence since the early 90s, and she currently serves on the executive board of directors for the Harris County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, and is also in private practice and specializes in equine assisted psychotherapy. Works with horses to do therapy. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Donna, and I'll just ask you to kind of start off talking to us about what is trauma and the relationship between trauma and domestic violence.
Okay, thank you, Thisha. So I'll start off with answering the second question. The relationship between trauma and domestic violence is all-encompassing. You can't have one without the other, quite frankly. But the definition of trauma, or one that is used most of the time, is the fact that trauma is an experience that an individual has, or a community can have, that is deeply disturbing, deeply disrupting. It disrupts their ability to cope, disrupts their sense of who they are as an individual, their sense of self, and it really diminishes their ability to completely and fully experience emotions and experiences. Some of that is a natural reaction to how our brain processes trauma, and there is the function of basically kind of shutting us down for a temporary time frame so that we cannot fully experience those things. But a healthy individual can then, after some time and some processing, be able to respond in a more fully functioning manner. The interesting thing and the disturbing thing about trauma is that it does not discriminate. It is pervasive throughout the entire world. And we as a globe are experiencing that right now in the sense of COVID-19, and also with the sense of domestic violence increasing so much with all of the isolation and all of the unemployment and all of the other traumas that are going on in our daily lives.
Very good. So, in talking about trauma, I think that, the whole focus of today is to really look at some of the long-term impact that it has on children and youth. And there was a study done that really has helped us to better understand that trauma is not something that, quote unquote, people, will just get over. Because a lot of times in working with survivors, many times they will say, I don't even think my children didn't even know about what was happening. And when something horrific happens, like a 6-year-old in her classroom witnessing the death of someone, people will say, oh, well, they'll grow out of it. They'll be okay. And what we now know is that that really isn't true. Help us understand the what's called adverse childhood experiences.
Okay, so let me back up just a little second. I probably need to start using a more current example, but we used to think that children were either a blank slate or what I used to call like an Etch-a-Sketch. And for those of us that remember what an Etch-a-Sketch was, it was a toy that you could draw with, and when you wanted to draw again, you just shook it. And that's kind of how we have viewed children for a long time, is that if you give them enough time, they'll walk it off, they'll shake it off, however you want to say it. And that is not the case. And what adverse childhood experiences show us, and have shown us for some time, this actual research started in the early 1970s. And if you think of adverse childhood experiences in the form of a triangle, kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of need, just think of the triangle. And the bottom base of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs is what we call for short, is that it's been narrowed down to about 10 elements or 10 experiences that children can experience all before the age of 18. And those things may be that someone in your home has abused drugs and alcohol. Your parents have been divorced. Someone in your family has gone to prison. Someone in your family has committed suicide. There has been domestic violence exposure. Children have watched their parents hurt one another. Or just that sense of massive neglect, where you grow up never really believing or feeling that someone loves you and takes care of you. Those are adverse childhood experiences, and that's the foundation. And as we grow as children, we start moving into the social, emotional, and cognitive development. We know enough about trauma at this and have for some time now, that trauma actually impacts the way our brains develop. And so if you are exposed to at least 4 ACEs before the age of 18, what we see is what we see in schools a lot of times with children that are not able to sit still. They're having difficulty learning, they have difficulty with self-control, and they are oftentimes aggressive. So that impacts their ability to be socially appropriate with others. Emotionally, they are unstable for that most. They have a difficult time actually learning the content that comes in class. And what we oftentimes think is, well, this child is hyperactive, and so we need to get them on some medication. When in fact, if we took a deeper dive, we would realize that they were in fact probably experiencing trauma and had for some time. So going back to that pyramid, the next level that we look at is as we're starting to get into our adolescence time frame, is that we're starting to see an adoption of health-related risky behaviors. So that's unprotected sex, that's use of alcohol and drugs, that is risky behaviors in the sense of driving erratically and things of that nature. Then as we move up closer into adulthood, we're starting to see an onset of diseases like diabetes and heart disease and lung disease from early onset smoking. And we start seeing the social problems come about. So this is somebody that's having a difficult time keeping a job because of their inability to be socially appropriate and be able to have a strong work ethic and things of that nature. And what we see is this continues. If this kind of behavior continues and the individual does not seek out help, they can literally lose, statistically speaking, they can lose 20 years of their life. So instead of living to the ripe old age of 85, they may only live to 65. So adverse childhood experiences, bottom line is what happens to us early on when it is unaddressed, it continues with us throughout our entire lifetime. And it doesn't just stop at age 18.
Wow. And when we look at just the current state of affairs, the things that we see in today's society, what you are saying is just so profound. Looking at the health outcomes, talking about diabetes and other types of diseases that I don't think we've ever made that connection, and talking about losing 20 years of your life. So going back again, because I was just so taken aback by that child. Here she is in the first grade, 6 years old, and looking at the long-term ramifications. Yes, we could say, oh, but she wasn't harmed. But what you're saying is that based on research and what we know is that perhaps maybe 20 years of her life is now taken off. What type of future will she have if there's not intervention? And unfortunately, that's what happens, I think, many times, is that there is not intervention, that she may have a hard time keeping a job. She may not stay in school. And if she doesn't stay in school, then what types of options will she have in life? Is there a higher risk for her to continue that cycle of domestic violence? So a lot, and more than we can cover in the time we have here today.
And let me just clarify that the loss of 20 years is a statistical statement, but it is also based on the fact that what we see is that individuals who grow up with 6 or more ACEs or ACE scores typically are the ones that statistically can lose that time. Now that's not a foregone conclusion that everybody who has 6 ACEs is going to lose 20 years of their life, but it is the process of not being able to process these things. And this little girl has now lost her mother and has lost her father. Her mother to death, her father to the criminal justice system. So right there we have basically 2 ACEs already.
Wow. And just from the comments we're getting, this is definitely great information, and I want to encourage individuals to do some self-teaching on your own, and definitely give us feedback. And these are things that we can actually hold virtual workshops through the council if this is something you're interested in. And who knows, we might even be able to get Ms. Amstberg to come in and actually do something. Who knows? Right. Let's go ahead and move on. Really great information. I had saw something in one of your presentations about attachment, attachment. And so talk to us about healthy versus unhealthy attachment when it comes to children who have this domestic violence.
Okay, so children learn to regulate their emotions through attachment. And that attachment is with their primary caregiver. And in today's world, it is still, I'll use the pronoun, her or she, because still in this day and age, the primary caregiver usually is our mom. And so we learn to regulate ourselves through that relationship with our mom. So if you think of an infant coming home, and typically what babies do is get them settled down, you put them down for a nap, and they'll sleep for a little while, and then they'll wake up and either they'll start fussing because they either are hungry or they're wanting some attention or they need to have their diaper changed, something of that nature. But they'll fuss and they'll fuss until mom comes back. And when mom comes back, her ability to reach down and pick up that child and meet its needs, whether it needs to be fed or a diaper change, that is all the building blocks of attachment. That baby is learning from that moment on, very early on, that when I need something, all I need to do is basically ask for it, and my mom will come to me, or my primary caregiver will come to me and meet that need. Mom will interact with the child. She will play with the baby. Baby will get tired again, baby will be put down for a nap, and the whole cycle begins again. Where we see the disruption, and that's a healthy attachment, that's one that we would love for all parents and babies to have. What we see is the difficult piece, especially, and we'll talk about this towards the end a little bit, but when mom has a problem with being able to meet the needs of that infant, that's where a lot of the problems begin as well. But with a disruptive attachment, you have the basic same scenario. You have the baby going down to sleep, waking up, needs a diaper change, needs to be fed, starts to fuss, only this time mom doesn't respond. And what happens when you don't respond to a fussy baby? They start getting louder. Mom still may not be able to respond to the baby, or if she does respond to the child, she is responding in a way that is resentful or filled with anger, or just flat out doesn't respond. So what we're teaching, what mom is teaching that baby inadvertently at this point, is that you needing to cry out for help is not going to get a consistent response. And so what it teaches the child is that they eventually they go through one of two patterns. They either become rageful and start really screaming and crying, or they basically just shut down and become apathetic because they realize they've been taught that mom is not going to respond to the child's needs. And then you have a situation where the baby is just basically apathetic. And you'll see different types of attachment. There's many different attachment styles, and you'll see children that basically, if mom leaves the room, it's like no big deal. There's not an attachment there. There's not a healthy attachment there. And so inadvertently, when inadvertently, what happens is the baby learns that, no amount of crying is going to change things. And when I talk about this in class, I always talk about the fact that, why is it that mom might not respond? It's not because she's a mean individual or an unloving individual. It can oftentimes be that she is ill. She may be mentally ill. She may be depressed. She may have passed away. And whoever is the primary caregiver does not have that same attachment with the child. So there's many reasons why mom may not respond to the baby. And I want to caution people not to just assume it's because she's an unhealthy mother.
Yeah, as I listen to you talk, I'm caught up with some emotion. And there's actually on Facebook, there's this video that's been around for a while, and it's where this mom is singing to her baby. And I don't know if you've seen it. And you can tell that the baby is like hanging on every word that this mom is saying. And then there's another video where the mom is just kind of holding the camera and the baby's just looking at her with all this adoration. And it just, I don't know. And so when I hear you talk about healthy, but then we talk about the unhealthy. And for those who may not be familiar with the dynamics of domestic violence, that what we know is that so many times what mom or dad may be going through can lead to them not having a healthy response to that crying baby. That if you are constantly, being isolated and you're dealing with your own depression, if you're constantly living in fear that, if I make the wrong move, that all of that then has an impact on someone's parenting style. And so that kind of leads us into talking about, we know that approximately 10 million children are witnessing domestic violence in their homes, that many of them may also be victims of some form of child abuse. And the reality is that these children will grow up, they will go into relationships, either healthy or unhealthy, and that they too will begin to have children. And so, I think about that 6-year-old child. I think about in the 23 years of doing this work in domestic violence, and much like yourself, what happens to those children who have witnessed this cycle and now they are in the role of being a parent? So help us with that.
So when you and I were first talking about this, we were both excited about the fact that we wanted to explore this because it's something that individually we have been looking at, but didn't realize that the two of us were interested in the same thing. And I think that we are very much a society that wants to blame moms for just about everything that goes wrong. And I think we need to put the brakes on in that regard. When an individual has had a history of childhood trauma, like we've talked about with ACEs, and their ability to socialize and their ability to be able to really think things through, that's impacted when they have not been able to receive any help with their early onset traumas. And this really has an impact on their ability to accurately read what their child needs. So again, if you have a parent who has been abused herself and her child is crying, that may be triggering the mom in a way that has her shutting down or disassociating instead of reaching out to her little one and trying to comfort the baby. And so that's part of it. So I'm really hoping, and I think we're going to be working on being able to talk more about what happens to parents when their own childhood traumas have not been addressed. And so one of the things that we see in some parents is that they are preoccupied, and they might actually wind up coming across as being hyperactive. And that's usually kind of the fight or flight. And most people are familiar with fight, flight, and freeze and those responses to trauma. And so when you've got a hyperactive mom, you may be having a mom that's actually in her own state of fight at this point. And at that point, if you've ever tried to reason with someone who is in the fight mode, you're not going to get very far very quickly. If you are working with a mom who is on the defensive side, this is somebody who's kind of detaching from the interactions that are going on, and again, is probably getting triggered by her own negative reactions and memories. It is difficult sometimes for a parent to really remember or connect the triggers that they're having. Especially if you've had them early onset, we have body memories or muscle memories, and sometimes those are difficult without the help of someone walking you through those traumas to figure out exactly what your triggers are. We will see parents avoid negative emotions and memories as a way of protecting themselves. And again, it's a defense mechanism that they use in order to keep themselves protected. But what does that do to the relationship that they have with others and also with their children if they are avoiding emotions and avoiding interactions? Again, disassociation can come in a number of ways, not only just avoiding interactions, but it can come through substance abuse. It can come through physical abuse, emotional abuse, if they are separated from their child. I think about what is happening at the border, and I think about it all the time, and what we have done to thousands of children. Um, we we have we have taken a attachment to a whole new, deeper, horrible level. What we have done to children in terms of their ability to attach is going to be lifelong, I fear. Um, Hyperarousal, if we have a parent who has been traumatized before, their sense of danger and their sense of threat may be way higher than is experienced by most other people. And so you might see somebody who's a much more easily anxious or much more easily irritable. And that's some of the areas. And then you look at the safety aspect of it. And it's kind of like two ends of the spectrum, in the sense that parents will have a difficulty assessing the potential partners in their lives. And so what we see oftentimes is that individuals are making, what we think from the outside viewpoint, making poor choices in new partners. And that may be that they're just not well equipped to ascertain whether somebody is safe or not. If you've grown up in a family that has not been safe for you, you're going to have a difficult time finding somebody else that is safe. It's just not going to look familiar. It's not going to look appropriate.
Right.
You may see them having difficulty cutting ties with other family members. That's their support system. Like it or not, good or bad, inconsistent as it may be, it is what they know. And so we do have a tendency to go back to what we know, and that can be very unhealthy as well. Moms may present as being overprotective in some situations and completely clueless in other situations. And again, it's those opposite ends of the spectrum that make it difficult for a parent to really make what we think are healthy decisions, not only for themselves, but for their children.
This is, we probably got about maybe 8 or 9 minutes for this platform that we're using. And
Okay.
I'm already thinking that I want to invite you back. And so we're going to have that conversation. And for those in the chat box, if you can just let us know if you would be interested in maybe a follow-up to this interview, because I've got like all these thoughts going through my head. Because, you know, what we're seeing is that, yes, we're talking about children and youth who have witnessed domestic violence, and then recognizing that the majority of those children are going to go on to become parents under all different circumstances, and that how this cycle continues, especially when the children are not getting intervention. And that's what I really want you to take away from this. Number one is that children are definitely impacted. And I see Tasha Dearborn, thank you so much. She says she would love to have a follow-up, so we will have to have you back. And Tasha's in our community, and she's doing some amazing work with teen girls, and helping them to share their stories about witnessing domestic violence and also sexual abuse. And so recognizing that children are traumatized, and it's not something that many times in families they'll go, oh, well, she'll get over it. He'll get over it. He'll be fine. And, you know, what you shared this morning is that with the adverse childhood experiences is that no, in many cases, they will not be just fine. That something has happened and it has to be recognized. And then moving that conversation further, looking at the future of that child who has witnessed violence or has had violence perpetrated against them. What kind of parent do they become? Will they become the best kind of parent they can based on what has happened to them, and if they've not received any type of support? So I think that this is a conversation definitely to continue forward. To kind of wrap us up and make sure we don't get cut off here on our would you share with our audience in about like a minute or less, what is one thing as a clinical social worker that you recommend for children who have witnessed violence, and how their parent and their community can help them?
I think we need to do a better job of educating everyone about the impact of trauma, because it's one of those things that's so pervasive. And when you have individuals who have been traumatized, they are part of families that have generally been traumatized. Those families are a part of communities that have been traumatized. And those communities build structures that are not necessarily trauma informed, but are basically trauma perpetuating. So we have, and we're seeing this right now in the media, where we're really starting to look at different societal systems. But I think that we need to do overall a better job of educating everyone and realizing that, and this might be a little bit of naive on my part, but I am kind of a glass half full person, in the sense that I really don't believe that parents go into starting families and having children with the idea that I'm going to neglect my child. And I think that we are just so eager to find a answer that is quick and dirty, and so we blame the parents for everything, and we don't go back and take a look at not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. And that's a quote from Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, and he's been very instrumental in the trauma field. And I think that quote resonates with so many people, is that we need to move away from that perspective of thinking that there's something wrong with the person, and really understanding at a deeper level that there is something that has happened to them.
That's good. That is so good. The time does pass by so fast, so fast. And time says, yes, that's it. That's it. Wow. Definitely going to have to bring you back. The information you shared has been so important. What I will do is we'll come back in the comments and put the link. There's several links out there where you can go and actually take the adverse childhood experience assessment test. I don't know, how people want to call it. And I love, and I even like to have a further breakdown, because you said that if we've experienced at least 4, I believe, correct?
If you've experienced at least 4, what we typically see in children is we see what we oftentimes incorrectly identify as hyperactivity, in the sense that the child has difficulty sitting still. They have difficulty taking in new information. They get irritable. They get, disruptive, sometimes aggressive. If it's 6 or more, that's where, statistically speaking, we're looking at actually there being a loss of years of their life, because of, and this is again, worst case scenario, where you've had 6 experiences in early childhood before 18, and there's been little to no ability for you to process those, or to in any way, shape, or form get some help with it.
Okay, awesome. Well, then I will post a assessment here in the timeline for people to take, and then maybe we can actually come back and talk more about, do a more drill down on ACEs, and also a more drill down at another time on those who have experienced violence as children or trauma, and about their parenting. Again, I want to thank you so very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and to visit with us today. And we look forward to seeing you in the very near future. All right, everyone. Thank you all for tuning in. Please share this information. Again, our guest today was Donna Amstberg, who is an clinical assistant professor at the University of Houston. She is an expert in trauma, and so we are very glad that she was able to take time and to share with us today. All of you have an amazing rest of the week, and I will see you next Monday, where I will be interviewing a young woman that I met. She actually, her mother was killed as a result of domestic violence, and she'll be sharing the journey of stepping in as the parent in her family to look after her 2 brothers, one of whom was actually shot the same day that her mother was shot, because we want to look at the after effects. We hear the stories about individuals, about mothers and fathers being killed in domestic violence. And then we hear that, oh, the children were not harmed. Just want to really shed some light on that, what life is like after the funeral and after the trial. All right. See you all next week. Everybody take care. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.